And it shows that it is recording. Let's start out with your questions. Do any of you have any questions for any of the things that you've been working on or anything that we've talked about so far?
I did have one with that first case study. It still has a, I guess, a turn it in spot for that first one, like your group presentation. Do we do anything for that?
No, I took it out of the grade book because we did it as a class. I wanted to do it as this is the way I want you to really think through and analyze all the case studies. So I did that and took that away from you to have to do that. So all you have to do with case study 1 is just write your personal reflection.
Okay.
Good question. And the other thing I want to remind people of, and the ones I need to remind are not on the video for us to talk with. You don't need to write your reflection on the case studies 2, 3, and 4 until after your group is met, because you're reflecting. Your personal reflection is about how the whole process worked and what you learned from each other and how in-depth you felt the discussion was, and was everybody willing to listen, or were some of them not listening to anybody's point of view but their own. So you're actually reflecting on how your group is working together, as well as the situation and how you felt about it. So you don't need to worry about doing the reflections until after your group is met and come up with your presentation. And that brings me to another question that I had, that someone was not sure how the presentations were going to work. All right, if I am remembering correctly, next week you are to work on case study 2. Does that sound right? All right, what you do, since we meet on the first night of your class, what you will do is during the week of the 28th through July 1st, you all will talk and you will come up with your group presentation. And then when we meet on July 2nd, each one of you will have your groups, not each person, but your groups will have 10 to 15 minutes to present what you came up with. And I've went ahead and made the distinctions. 2 groups are doing, I think it's question 2, and 2 groups are doing question 3. Because we found out last semester, if each group does all of it, then you're going over the exact same thing over and over and over. So I divided it up, and one group will focus on one part and another couple of groups will focus on the other. So one group may find something that the other one doesn't, and that's good to have at least 2 different groups of opinions. But the only exception to that will be when we get to the very end. It may be that when we get near the very end, you will need to do case study 4 a week ahead in order for us to do your presentation. I've got to look back at that and double check that. Does that help clarify how all that is? So for next week, you'll actually, in your group, create your presentation and have it ready to present. And then when we meet in July, the 2nd, that's when you'll actually present your case study information.
Where do we find out which question we're answering?
It is under the case study, and it may be under the week that you have. I may have put it in the week. I made that change, made those additions like in the last few days. So it may be, look in week 6 and see if it's there. Scroll on down to the bottom, or where it has the case study with the directions. See if you can find it there. You see it?
I've got the directions, but I don't see anything that says.
So it
says groups 1 and 2.
Yeah. How do we know which number groups we are?
You should. Okay. I will go back and make sure you have that, because I think when I set them up, I assigned them group 1, 2, 3, and 4. But I assumed that it showed up in your group numbers. But if it doesn't, I will make sure that I post that. Okay?
If you look on the left side of your screen where it gives us a week-by-week setup for the course, at the bottom of it, it says My Groups, and it says Group 1 for me. So it may say the same for you guys. If you'll look, just kind of scroll down to the bottom, see where it says My Groups. And then,
Yeah.
James, I'm assuming we're in Group 1.
Yeah, we've got Group 4 on mine.
Okay. I thought it showed up somewhere, but I couldn't remember where it was. So, Nick, thank you very much for doing that. But I will go ahead and try to post that so it'll be easy for everybody to find. That's a good question. All right. Anything else about like next week or the case study or anything like that? Okay. I want to just quickly review what Dr. Bullis went over with you all last week. He was kind enough to share it with me, and we both are using the exact rubric, and we're trying to get you to do the exact same things and make it real easy for your evaluator. I think I've told you before, you want it to be so easy that when your evaluator gets it, they can go, okay, here, this is, and this is, and this is. And so it's there. They give you a 4 and move on. And if they have to hunt for it, sometimes it makes them take a lot of time. And see, all of these come in about at the same time. And some of your evaluators may have 2 or 3 or 4 classes to do. And so when they're having to hunt, it just makes their job harder. But if you can do it and make it follow the rubric, then you have helped them, and you've also made it easier for them to find. And in the end, it'll probably help your grade. But the one thing, as I've reviewed some of the task 3s that have been turned in already, the one thing that I'm finding missing is the first part, and that's the reason I bolded it. And let me see if I can share my screen and find the one I want you to look at. Yes, there it is. All right, can you see my screen now with our agenda for tonight? Is that what it's showing? All right, this is the part that it's weak or it's not listed. And I think you all are doing it, but sometimes when you're doing it, you're just not writing it down in your narrative. But it says, working with your building administrator, you're to analyze the academic schedule to assure maximal compliance with the defined set of necessary and or required circumstances and or conditions in the school. The analysis should include the following. Now, what you don't have to do everything with your school administrator. You can do most of it. But the important thing is that they're aware of what you're doing, and that you do share the information with your school administrator. Doesn't mean they have to do it, but you just make sure you share it. So you are to look at your current scheduling procedures, and you're looking for the good parts about it, but you're also looking for the areas for improvement. And then and I know Dr. Bullis pointed this one out, but alignment with any related school improvement team findings. Now, most of the time, your school improvement team is going to be working on either whatever your weakness is, whether it's math or whether it's reading or whether it's science or whether it's attendance. But they're going to have some goals. And so if what you have found in the scheduling connects with the school improvement team findings, then make sure you talk about that in at least a section or point it out somehow so that your evaluator will know it's there. Now, this next part is legal requirements for ongoing teacher collaborative planning and instruction. Now, I'm not real sure that there is a law that says that teachers have to be collaborative. There is one about making sure teachers have planning time. And I know with all the PLCs, the collaboration is a big piece of that. So make sure you go back and look at the laws and how many minutes of instruction are supposed to be in a particular year. That's one of the important things that you need to make sure that, there is law in North Carolina that tells you how much instructional time is to be there. And one of the things when I was at the central office that I had to try to figure out was, okay, if we have all of these breaks and we take away from instructional time, if we take away snow time, are we actually doing what the state has told us that we have to do? And it gets to the point that sometimes it's really close. So, you know, you have to factor in when you don't follow your schedules. I'm not sure that many people do, but that's one of the things that you really need to look at. Then, of course, one of the pieces that they're looking about is the needs of diverse and exceptional populations. What kind of accommodations for specific groups and individual needs are present in your school? And I've read some of your things, and, you know, several of you have tutoring times. There is called different things, but it's tutoring times at the end of the day or in the middle of the day or at lunchtime. So you're doing those things. So just make sure you bring that out. And exceptional children doesn't have to be the only group you look at. As a matter of fact, it should not be the only group. There are English language learners. There are children who are just slow and they do not ever get the recognition and the extra help that they need, but they really need the extra help because they just don't learn as quickly as others. They need more time. So look at a lot of the subgroups, not just the ones that's been identified as EC. Then this part, your keyword is evidences. Now, I would suggest that your evidence could be a survey. It can be minutes from a meeting. It could be an agenda where you are showing those kinds of things. I realize you're in summer and you may have done it beforehand and you may have to create some of the things that you talked about in focus groups, or you may have to send out an email and get some help now. But don't forget that that is one of the pieces that they're asking for, some form of evidence. Now you can do your narrative and then choose to put the evidence at the back as an appendix, or you can include it in that part. And then the last part is utilizing the findings of your analysis as a basis for revising the current schedule. Now, it may be that you don't find many things that need to be done to it. Brian, I heard your question to Dr. Bullis about, I think it was yours, that has the unique situation where the whole county is basically put on a schedule from the central office. There's probably not a whole lot you can change about it, but you might, as you're actually looking about how it functions in your school following the schedule, would there be a better way to do some things that would not change a lot at other schools? Is there something that you can focus on in your school that would help in your school, but it wouldn't have to change everything for everybody else? So those are the kinds of things that you can look at to try to help come up with answers for, and some of you work in unique settings. And so you have totally different situations than almost any other school in your county. So, but I always used to tell my students when I was teaching, you know, if there's not anything you can change and do about it, then there's not a whole lot that you can worry about and trying to make things different. But whatever you can control at your side, that's where you want to focus your time and your energy. And you make suggestions. It doesn't have to be followed. But it shows that you're looking at it from your perspective at your school, and you're analyzing whether this is the best use of instructional time. Do you waste a lot of time? Are there too many breaks? I know one of the discussion items when the school system where I was the superintendent, when we went from a 6-period day to a 4-period day, was, you know, how are we going to get enough hours throughout the year? Well, you don't. So the State Department, because that was being pushed for a lot of school systems, they backed off on the number of hours that you were supposed to get for each of the high school classes. But it also pointed out that you only have transitions 4 times in the day after each period, before school and then after each of the class periods. And so you have less transition time, which meant less students getting into trouble, because most of the high school students that got in trouble, they did it when they were changing classes. And so, you know, those are kinds of things to look at that might help you as you're looking at that. Another thing, when you're in an alternative school, those students usually have to have a lot of structure. So if they are allowed to move too frequently, you're going to have trouble. And so you have to look at your schedule. You have to look at the population you're dealing with and figure out what works. Because what works at one school will not always work at another. And you may try something one year as a school administrator and realize, okay, this was a bad mistake. We just don't do it again. You know, that a lot of education is trial and error. Yes, there's best practices, but you all know, just like I do, what works with one group of kids doesn't work with the next group of kids. When I first started teaching, I taught high school students, and I liked the concept of having everybody in a U shape where I could see their face and they could see my face and we could have some open discussions. I got a group that was so immature that the first thing I did was I put them in straight lines where they couldn't touch each other and where I could walk in between each one of the rows of students. So, you know, and the maturity level of your students has a lot to do with what will work and what will not work. So you have to look at all of those kinds of things. And I did suggest, if you look at my suggestions, subheadings so that it's very easy to find. Sometimes when you embed a lot of information in your analysis, it's hard for them to find it. So you can go ahead and do your analysis and then pull parts of it out if you need to and just repeat it. You know, just copy and paste if you got it all in your analysis, but you want to make sure that they find all the pieces. And then I went ahead and mentioned some of the things that I've already talked about. Now I'm going to go ahead and talk with you about task 4. Task 4 is your reflection on 12 of the competencies that are required for the OMA. Now, pages 12 and 13 of your syllabus list 17 competencies that they say the OMA uses, or that you should use and become better at in developing the OMA. You don't have to address all 17 of those in your reflection. You just address 12 of them. I would choose, if I were doing it, I would choose the 12 that I felt I'd made the most improvement or gained the most experience in as I've worked on this particular artifact. There's basically 3 parts that you want to remember. And this is what a lot of people fail to do, and then they have to go back and add. The key to completing this task is to take into account your course content, 1, your artifact work, 2, and your internship work, 3. So there's 3 components that you're looking at, and you're thinking about, okay, how did this help me become stronger in this? You need to include something about your coursework or your course content. It doesn't have to be the work as much as the information you're reading and learning about. It can be some of your group work. But there needs to be something said about the course content. They're looking for the whole course is put together with 3 components, and they want you to reflect on all 3 of those. So that's often the part that's left out. A lot of times people will talk a lot about their internship experiences, and I expect that because that's where you learn a lot. Then they'll talk a lot about the artifact work. But don't forget that course content piece. The rubric says that your narrative includes a reflective analysis of course content in relation to awareness and development of the competencies. So again, it's that reflective piece of how did the information in your textbooks, the activities that you did, your group work, how did that help you become stronger in those competencies? Communication would be one of them, and I can't remember whether that's one of the 17 listed or not, When you do your group work and when you attend the class Zoom sessions, that's communication right there. So that's a piece that you could easily reflect on. The rubric, and I went ahead and put the rubric also includes where you talk about your clinical experiences and how they related to your development of the competencies. And again, you can have more than 12, but you have to have at least 12. Now, one of the things to remember is this task is not the same as what goes in your competency folio. I don't need any evidences in this. There doesn't have to be anything that's an evidence in this task. It is your reflection where you're tying those three components of the class together. In your competency folio, Dr. Lamb has said, I want evidence, I want proof, I want very little narrative. So make sure that you put your narrative in this part, in this task. Now, this is not set up for anybody to look at except me and if you share it with Dr. Bullis. That would be the two of us. So it doesn't have to have any comments from a peer reviewer. So anything you put down is just to be read by us. So make sure you think about that as you're doing that. So do you have any questions about task 4 at this point?
With you mentioning that we don't need the evidence, I've kind of been completing task 4 while submitting into the competency folio. So I've been adding the appendices, but at the very end, so it's not cluttered throughout task 4. But is that going to be all right?
I think that'll be fine. The biggest thing is the task 4 is your reflection. Okay. And it's your thought process, and you've got to have those 12. And it's smart to do the two together. But one is wanting the evidence, and the other one really doesn't care whether you've got the evidence or not. So if you put it in the appendix, I think you're fine. You've covered your bases, and then you can pull it back into your competency folio.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. My cat's here meowing. It's thundering at our house. And I have a cat that when it's thundering, she wants to go to the basement. She does not like thunder or rain. So if you hear my cat, don't worry about her. She's all right. The next part is one of the things that many times you won't have an opportunity to do, but if you do have an opportunity to work on helping to develop or renovate a new school or a renovation of an old school, you need to think through a lot of things. And a good architect will always get the teacher's opinions about how are you going to use this room? What do you need in this room? And those kinds of things. Do you need open space? Do you need small group space? And that kind of thing. And they'll take that information and then they'll build it into what they present to the school board whenever they get ready to make those decisions. So page 175, I think you read this chapter like in the first or second week, and it's the resource management for school administrators. And it's on page 175, and they've got a case study here. It says, the Board of Education of Everest Public School System has determined it's going to need a new elementary school building. Now, some of you in the larger systems, you find yourself in this because a lot of the systems that have large cities, those are growing, while a lot of the systems that are in the rural areas, they have people moving out. I think it's related to jobs. I think that, you know, parents are very, will often move if there's no job. And then the kids have to go with them. And so I think if the jobs are in the larger cities and those communities, then those schools are going to be growing and they're going to have to build new schools. And if it happens to be in rural areas because there's not many jobs, then those schools are going to be declining. But anyway, this building, they're hoping to set up for 400 students. It's going to be pre-K through 5th grade. So you've been selected to become the principal of a new school. And you've been asked to visit new schools that created an active learning environment for students through facility design. You've also been charged with researching best practices regarding space utilization, flexibility, technology, and design. And so based on your investigation, these are the questions. I picked out some of them, not all of them. Who would you involve in the design of a new building or renovated building? If you're the principal and you've been asked to become involved, who are you going to ask to help you come up with suggestions to make?
I'd be asking my lead teachers.
You will want your lead teachers. What about others? If you just ask your lead teachers, how are those first-year teachers and those teachers who are itinerant, how are they going to feel about what you've done?
Pretty sure it becomes important to kind of have a sit down with every single staff member, whether it be by subject area or not. We just opened our brand new school 2 years ago, moving from a building that was built in 1912 to one that was just brand new open. And prior to them even breaking ground, they met with each kind of PLC group and asked, what are you using the space for? What do you specifically want? They asked us, most importantly, what do we need and what do we want? This way we can establish those two lists. And I think that from an administrative perspective is really a good idea to establish what do we first need and then what do we want beyond that, so we can kind of pick and choose.
And that's exactly what they should have done. Now, you also pointed out another piece that you can ask for a lot of things, but when it gets down to dollars and cents, it's what can you live without? You know, many times boards of education have to make decisions based on the money available. And I can speak to this, and Nick will be very aware of this because he's in one of the buildings that we built. We had to choose the method of construction that we did because that was the only thing the county could afford. To build a traditionally built brick and mortar and block and mortar building as would have cost so much more than the county could have borrowed at the time. And the county was trying to do water and sewer, and they were trying to do schools to get to the middle school concept. And they had several different things that were going on, working with the community college as well. So it was, where could we find someone who could build a school cheaper and it still look really good on the outside? And so Wilkes County had done that. And so we visited their schools, and the difference in them and what a lot of school systems with a lot of money do is the newer schools in Wilkes and the two middle schools in Yadkin, they are still frame supporting beams. That's where the support is. It's not the block and the brick that's the support for the school. But it's cheaper to build them that way. Now, is it as sturdy? And probably not, but it is sturdy. It's not anything that is not safe. It is very safe, but you may have to redo some walls and those kinds of things. But you also have that flexibility by being steel frame. You can tear walls out and put them back in if you need to reshape them in some form or fashion. So, you know, you have to look at what the money of what the school system has available for it and what you can convince the county commissioners to spend on your schools. So that has a lot to do with what happens too. So we did involve the teachers that were teaching at the time. The other thing that happens is the teachers that are there at the time you're building the school, they have ideas, and then the teachers who come in behind have different ideas, and they think, well, why were they not asked? Well, they were, but they may have had different opinions from from what the teachers currently have. The next question is, what would the school look like to a student? What do most students want their school to look like?
I think students want some color in their building. Mine is from the early 60s, and it's one of those where they went in and added walls to make classrooms because it was an open concept.
Yeah.
And so there's some walls that don't go all the way to the ceiling or all the way to the outside wall, so you have little holes that students can look through and see each other still. But it's very bland, and they also use paint with what is it? Lead, so we can't paint over the walls unless we contract people to come in to scrape everything out and redo it.
I bet it's asbestos instead of lead.
Asbestos.
It could be either one, but asbestos, whenever you're trying to remove that, you have to contract, and then they have to seal up the building and do all kinds of interesting things too. But with asbestos, if you cover it, it's not an issue. You just can't remove it. So it could be either one of those, talking about the time frame you're talking about. Interestingly, I did my student teaching in the late 60s. No, it was in the 70s. I did my student teaching in the 70s, and they had built a brand new school at the high school level with the open concept, open classroom concept. By the time I got there, I think the school had been open a year and a half. By the time I got there, there were created walls. That is, there were boxes piled all the way to the top, taller than the students. There were cabinets all the way to the top. And so it was, it was not a smart idea to have an open concept classroom at the high school level. You would have English going on one side, and you'd have science somewhere else, and it was just open. It just did not make a lot of sense. But anyway, teachers and the administrators found a way to deal with it, and I'm sure by now they have individual classrooms with everything, but the teachers had got cabinets and boxes and had their walls all the way to the top, at least for a space where the students could sit and talk with the class and not have to be watching everybody else. So, but you're bringing out some really interesting things that you have to look back at and do research on. Open classroom has a good idea, and I think the idea was that if students need to move from one place to another, they can do it, and they can do it easily because maybe they're slower in one area and they can be in one classroom for that, and then maybe they're faster in another, so maybe they could go to another classroom for math and you could see them and it would just flow. But when you're dealing with lots of little bodies, the flowing doesn't work too well. So, a lot of things have good ideas to start with, but when you start to practicing them, that's where the problems come up. Another question to think about as you're talking about and coming up with the plans and working with architects is, how would students be served by the design? When you're looking at the designs the architects are talking with you about preliminarily, what is it you're going to be looking at to see how the students are going to be served? Do you have large spaces for classrooms? Do you have some small meeting areas? Do you have some small areas within the classroom that you can organize to have your students work together? So it's talking about what kind of activities can you do to help the students learn. So that's how would the students be served by the design. So when you're looking at this design, is it a good design for learning? Are there ways, And then there's another piece that when your book was written, it wasn't one of the things that you had to concentrate on, which you do now. I would say safety also needs to be a part of that. How will the students be served by the design, but also how safe is the design? Most of the people who are designing schools now, they have gone to one large building because you can lock them down. Back in the 60s, when a lot of the high schools were being built in the part of the state where I live, they were on a campus design. And I know as I've been traveling for Gardner Webb and was working with the interns, a lot of schools are on campus design. In other words, you have one building here and another building here and another building here, and one is the English building and one's the math building and one's the health and PE, and you have all the different buildings. But with the safety as one of the issues, that is really hard to control your access. And it's really hard to make sure all of those doors are locked and that the students are kept safe. So that's one of the reasons a lot of the buildings being designed these days have a main front entrance with some technology there. And then they try to keep all the other doors locked, and they try to keep it where the students are going within the building. And even when you're doing additions, that's one of the things that we're trying to do as well. When you think about your classroom, the learning environment, what would you all want in your classroom? What would you want the space to look like? And it'll be different for the younger children from the middle and high school kids.
Well, if you're teaching high school science, you'd want to have rows of lab tables. I teach middle school science, and I just have what they consider to be lab tables. It's just a table with 4 legs that 2 students can sit at, but it's more beneficial if I've got bigger lab space where the students can collaborate.
And that's a good point. What about the little ones, the younger ones? What do they need?
We incorporate a lot of flex seating, so we've got rid of a lot of the ordinary desk and tables and kind of made it into little things that they can move around on the floor or take where they want to work and make it flexible for them in a comfortable environment. Now, the only part that becomes hard is we're allowed to do that all year long, but come testing time, they want them in a standard desk and chair, and you have to pull all that furniture back out. So you have to find storage to keep all that stuff all year long too.
That makes it tough. That makes it tough. Yeah. Anything else? You brought out some really good points. All right, when you're thinking about technology, what type of technology would you incorporate into the design? What would you want the architects to put in?
Sufficient cabling for upgrading phone and voice capabilities.
Okay.
The school we're in right now, we cannot put phones in every classroom. The building and the cabling can't support it.
And that's what happens when you're in these older buildings, and some of them even not that old. But if they had cut on money when they were putting in some of those things, then yeah, it's going to cost a lot more to go back in and add it, and a lot of times you won't have the capability to do what you need to do. In addition to phones and cables, what else would you want there?
Well, this goes back to safety, not instructional, but cameras. I know that when my new principal came in about 6 or 7 years ago, they had to go in and they looked at all the spots where they think they needed to put cameras for safety concerns there. It was, again, one that was built in the 60s. So they upgraded cameras. They got, Wi-Fi hooked up. So they had to go in and route all of those things and put all of those, things into the building there.
Okay. Anybody else have anything to add about that, the technology? You want phones in every room. You would want computers and smart boards. You would want to make sure you had enough wiring that if you had to use or plug something in, you could do that. Fire marshals do not like things hanging down from the ceiling. They do not like cords, any kind of extension cord or cord that is visible. They get really upset over that. So you have to think also about what fire marshals are looking for as you're doing this. So as much as you can get in the walls or in a tube that will handle all the cables, then that you're much better off. And then the question is, how would instruction be enhanced by the design? So if you are making recommendations to the architects, what is it that you're thinking about in your instruction that you would think that, okay, if we could have the building designed this way so in the classrooms, it would actually help the instruction? What's one of the key things you would look for if you had to look at the building design and think about just instruction in your classroom or your grade level? What would
Transitions.
Transitions. Yes. Yes. Anything else?
I look at the outside of the school at the one I'm at, and there's a lot of nooks and crannies that makes it kind of hard for our custodian to mow and weed eat into. Or maybe just make it spaces where you can incorporate an outdoor classroom or courtyard or something that could be more suitable than just an area that's a headache and an eyesore when it's not kept up the way it's supposed to be.
That's an excellent suggestion. One of the things that I know some of the schools have started doing is some of the science teachers have decided it was important for their children to actually know how seeds grow. And so they've planted little gardens, and then while the students are still there, they do the planting and then they do the weeding, and then during the summer the students can come back and they can get the vegetables that grow there. So some science teachers have chosen to go into the vegetable garden, because when you think about it, when I grew up, most everyone had a garden if you lived out in the country, and most of us did. We lived in rural areas. So we knew how corn grew, we knew how potatoes grew, we knew how tomatoes grew. But some of the children we have now, it all comes from the grocery store, and they don't know how anything grows. And you stop and think about that and you think, gosh, how did we get to this place? But we did it because we are totally reliant on others for almost everything that we eat anymore. And there are still people that have little gardens, but at the same time, it's the big farmers that are doing most of the growing of the food. And it's not just in the United States. We're importing a lot of food from other countries too. How would teacher collaboration be enhanced by the design? What is it you would need to do to make sure that you encourage teacher collaboration when you were designing your building?
Making sure that rooms are in close proximity to one another.
And I have seen in some of the older schools, actually, it's not the newer ones, but some of the older schools, they would put a pod in the middle between several classrooms of the same grade level. And that would be the workroom for that group of teachers. So they stored their stuff there, and then that would give them a space that they could meet in after school as well. So that's one of the things that would encourage teacher collaboration as well. Anything else that you can think of that the close proximity is really important. Having some kind of space that they could meet and store some of their stuff that would be a little bit away from students would be helpful. Anything else you can think of? All right, what design elements would you include to allow for future flexibility of the learning space? What would you try to do to give some flexibility for the future?
I know in Winston-Salem, they always talked about it's cheaper to build up on top of a building instead of purchasing more land. So a lot of the newer schools that they're designing and building allow them to be one story, but if the population grows, it allows them to build on top of it instead of having to purchase outside and get all that taken care of.
Okay, that's a good point. Can you think of other things that would allow for future flexibility? One of the things you might want to think about is having a classroom that's larger than what you really need for now, so you could have some changes in you could have a small group space, and you could have a whole classroom space, and you could have a place on the carpet if it's little children that they could sit and do group work. So, you know, sometimes if you have that luxury, you may not have that luxury, but it would be cheaper to build the larger rooms when you're building it than to come in and try to delete a wall. You can always add them, but it's harder to delete them. Then I want us to just talk briefly about these other things. And this is mainly to get you to think. I really think some of you will actually have this opportunity. Some of you will have the opportunity to help build a new school. And so, or even to renovate an old school. We did a lot of renovations when I was assistant superintendent because we had money available to us for that. And we didn't have enough money to do new schools, but we could renovate the ones that were built in the 60s. And so we did. So when you think about your own experience in the various schools you've been in, even as a student in college level, what environmental factors most affected learning and why? Think about testing. What affects learning and what affects happens during testing?
We've had that discussion a lot about testing kids in the same classroom because there's research that supports they remember things that were on the wall, and by looking there, it activates some memory for them.
That's right. That's right. What about noise outside? If your building is not well constructed, then sometimes the noise from outside comes in, and it can be very distracting, especially to children that are easily distracted. So, you know, you try to make sure that you're going to have as few distractions as possible, especially for those children that can get distracted easily. And then one of the things, there is research that's available that tells you about the environmental factors that will help with learning. So you would want to do some of your own research and see what the newest research says, because you can find research that goes back years ago and then on up to today, and it changes. The next question is, how can a building principal ensure they are operating a cost-effective custodial maintenance program? This is really more of a central office question, but a building principal could look at his school and compare it to other schools, and looking at the square footage and looking at the number of students and compare the number of hours, and could make a good argument for or against additional hours or less hours. I know we had a formula when I was working, and it was based on the number of students and the square footage, and our maintenance person was the one who sort of kept up with that at that time, and that determined how many hours you got, and then the principal could decide whether he wanted it to be a full-time custodian and a maid, or, what did he want and what kind of hours? Did he want 2 part-time people instead of 2 full-time people? Or did he want 1 full-time and 2 part-time? So, they would give them the hours and then they would decide. You usually want a custodian there during the daytime while the students are there, but that's also a very difficult time to get the place really clean unless they're going in and out of classrooms while the students are at lunch, and there's usually not enough of them to do all of that sweeping and that kind of stuff. And most of the time the teachers feel like the rooms aren't getting cleaned, and probably they're not getting cleaned as much as they need to be. But there should be a formula that sort of gives you an idea about the students and the square footage and how many people that you need or how many hours of work, and then the principal could help decide whether they've got the most efficient way of dealing with that. I put this one in here because I want you to really think about, if you go to your school and you look at it as if you've never been there before, do you think your school is really clean? And what's the appearance of the hallways, the classrooms, and restrooms? And what grade would you give the custodial staff? Would people see pride in your current school facility when they walked into your building? I don't care how old the building is. It can still be clean, and it can still be attractive to the people when they walk in. I know when I was an assistant principal, we had some really talented parents, and we got permission to allow them to paint the bathrooms. And they painted a mural of jungle-looking animals. This was a K-6 school. And they painted murals of jungle animals and made it really, really bright. And the kids were really excited about how pretty the bathrooms looked. This building was built in the 50s, so it was not a new building. It was an old building. And normally your central offices will keep up with the roofs, they'll keep up with general painting, and they'll keep up with floors. And those had been done, but to really get it to be really attractive, then you have to do something else. We just had some very talented parents who were willing to do that. And so that, I think, spruced up, and it gave the kids some pride. Sometimes you put things on the walls that don't have to be paint, but it can still draw attention, maybe your school mascot or something, and make it look really attractive. So there are some things. But if I were to visit each one of your schools, what would be my impression of your schools?
So I'll be the first to admit, my school, with how new it is, they're very hesitant to put anything on the wall. So it's very sterile looking, especially since we're kind of a tenant in a building on the community college campus. So you walk in and you don't get that sense of I'm in a high school, or you don't get that very welcoming feel of, this school is welcoming to all students. You just get that feel of, am I in an airport, or am I in a main building of a university kind of thing? So I've kind of been fighting a lot this year to try and get something on the wall, but again, they're just so hesitant because of how new everything is.
What could you do instead of putting something on the wall?
I don't know.
What about plants?
Some teachers have. They're, for some odd reason, the aesthetics down in the main commons area, once you walk into the building, they want it to be that sterile look. But individual teachers within their own classrooms have brought in, plants and put different things on their walls that are more attractive. But the school as a whole is still just that very sterile feel to it.
If they won't let you do it, there's not a lot you can do, but you can make your classrooms inviting. Plants is one thing, and they don't even have to be live plants. You can have silk stuff. It's not as good as having live plants, but if they don't want you having anything that can leak and stuff, you can still get a nice silk plant and put in, and it will look good. and it will make it look more lived in than just always being sterile. So, you know, you have to sometimes think about what can you put up temporarily. Are there any statues for your school mascot that are small that you could put somewhere? You know, those kinds of things. So you have to live within the environment where you are, but still. Is your school really clean? Oh, it's not. Okay, that's not good. All right, what about the rest of you? Some ideas about your school. What am I going to see when I go, if I were to come to your school?
We're currently down 2 custodians. One of them had a medical problem. The other one's husband got hit with Guillain-Barré. So by the end of the year, it got to the point where the kids were grabbing brooms and sweeping because they just couldn't take it. And the 2 that we've got are doing all they can, but there's just not enough bodies for the size of our building.
Yeah, yeah. And I will tell you, when I was first started teaching, we cleaned my classroom because I couldn't stand it either. And so every once in a while, the students and I would sweep. We even mopped. Now, they didn't like it, but we did it anyway. So, and I never did get called down for it, but I probably would today, but I didn't back then. But, you know, that just tells you your students have pride in what they're doing and that they want to live in a good space and be in a good space, which I think is commendable to your students and to you all as well. What about some of the rest of you?
Mine is kind of dated. We just took some pictures off the wall last week of children who now have grandchildren at our school. And nobody wanted to take them down because there's staff members and parents in the community that say this is the way it's always been. We want to keep it this way. And in our cafeteria, there's a mural on the wall with the very first secretary from the old school that came over to the new school who was a student at the old school. And she's on the wall and just stares at everybody eating. We're wanting to paint over it, but we're going to get backlash from the community if we do that.
The reason I'm laughing is when I first started working in the central office, we had pictures up and down, and they were beautiful pictures of people, students. And we finally took them down while I was there, but one of those students had graduated and was already working somewhere. That was how long it took us to get to where we took them down. So I know exactly what you're talking about. All right, what about James and Nick? What about your schools?
Yeah, I mean it's clean. We're trying to there for a long time when we first moved into it, because like I said, you were talking about how you were there during the construction of the 2 middle schools. A lot of just blank walls. I mean, there was nothing on it. They finally started doing a little bit of painting on those walls. I actually talked with my principal this year about hanging up boards across the front hallway right outside the office. And so on those boards now, this is the first time it's been done this school year, we've got an athletics board. And each season we post pictures of kids playing different sports, post their schedules. We've got a beta club board. We have the National Honor Society board. We have chorus and band, and we just post pictures and things that students are doing.
Yeah, similar with mine too. I think it was really bland. The new principal that I got hired with, he came in, did a lot of painting, the doors, other places in school colors in the hallway. They put a lot, you know, like those motivational ones, but they did it with pictures of the students or the athletes. The gym got a big revamp. They put, you know, the 1,000-point scorers up there. They changed up a lot of the championships that were won. They did that on the football field too. So we're allowed to hang up stuff there, and in the high school you need information, and each kind of hallway has, you know, they're encouraged in the beginning of the year. That's one of the things, like usually a few teachers kind of spearhead and put a lot of stuff on the bulletin board, informational things too. So I think before that wasn't done a lot, but I think with the new administration, that was definitely one of the things that he wanted to change.
Okay. All right. And then the last question is, what can you do to make an older school look appealing to your students to the point they will take pride in themselves and help keep them looking good? What can you do with an older building?
I think when you give the students a task to do, like you're gonna renovate a courtyard and you buy flowers and you help them plant it, or you put, you want to put art on the wall, so you ask them to draw things. They take pride in that and they're more willing to take care of it.
That is correct. And one of the things that you also need to think about is look at the outside. When I first went to my school that I went to as the principal, one of the first things I noticed, it was a beautiful outside, but nobody had trimmed the shrubbery. And so it was just getting way out of line. And so not the first year, but the second year, during the summer, I trimmed the shrubbery and I had an administrative intern, and her husband was one of my teachers. And so we trimmed all the shrubbery around there. Now, was I familiar enough to know that I was doing it right? No, but they didn't die, and it looked a lot better the next year, and they grew better. So sometimes you just have to do what needs to be done, and you have to do it yourself because there's not enough people to do it. But in the summertime, when nobody's around and you're in charge of getting the school looking better, that's when you can do some of the things. Now, a lot of your school systems will not allow painting unless the central office, particularly maintenance, approves it. And a lot of times they will only approve a certain color because they bought it in quantities. And so it goes to the color that you have to have. So you have to find out all of the rules about what your school will allow. And many times you can, if you have a good relationship with the maintenance supervisor, it will help you get a lot more things done than if you are at constant odds with them. So I'm just telling you that to make sure that there's key people that you need to make sure you befriend when you are a principal, because your life will be easier and they will be kinder to you. Sometimes the people who are always fussing at them are the ones that get the work, but they get it reluctantly, and it's not voluntary. So remember all of the people that you work with. And it's not that you're trying to get something that you don't deserve, but just let them know you appreciate what they're doing. And that's usually and they'll do everything they can to help you. They'll often send the people to paint your walls instead of having to rely on you. But a lot of times it's kindness that goes further than anything else. All right. We've got just a little bit of reminders. Go ahead and begin working on task 3. We will have a class Zoom conference next Tuesday. If there's questions, let me know, and pay close attention to the information in your textbook related to the various issues that may occur in schools in the chapters you're to read this week. This week you've got 3 chapters in the school law textbook, and they deal with the activity 4 or just some general discipline issues. So look at those. It's really important for principals to know information that's in those chapters. And it may change, but if it does change, then you at least have a basis for what to begin thinking through some of the situations that may occur. All right, any questions for tonight that you want me to address? All right, I am going to end the meeting and stop the recording. And if anyone has any questions, and once I stop the recording, you're welcome to stay on. I'll stop the recording first, and then if not, I will